Hey folks, Matthew Weiss here, WeissAdvice.com. In this video, I want to walk through my mix of Como No by Akon and Becky G. Not only did I mix this record, but I also recorded all of the parts, and I was involved in the production session, so I had a lot of control as an engineer, and I have a lot of insights into the entire making of the record, which is nice. It should provide a lot of information here. So let's jump in, let's listen to some of the record down, and then let's go through it. Como no, si tú a mí me tienes temblando. Como no, si yo a ti te tengo sudando, seguimos bajando.
Como no, si la noche está comenzando. Como no, si la cama está calentando, seguimos bajando. ¿Quién dijo que yo lo que quiero es hablar?
Alright, so the way this record came about, we were in the middle of making the El Negrito album, and Mafio was producing the entirety of the album, but we wanted to get some composition and writing from John Leone and his team, which is Mal, Ricky, and Camilo, and that was really mainly just to sort of switch it up, break things up, see what new stuff could come to the table. So we popped on over to John's studio, and Con selected maybe 5 records. Mal and Ricky went off and did writing for a couple of them. Camilo stayed in the main studio and did the writing for this one, and it was written with the intention of having Becky on the album. And then John was fleshing out the production as Camilo was writing, and then we tracked Con at John's studio. So that all was laid down first, and then later we ended up tracking in Becky over at Sphere in LA. So first I want to go through some of the production stuff. The production, I think, there's a lot of interesting... Well, really, there's just mainly sort of one interesting overall concept here, which is the idea of, like, not doing anything unless there's a reason. So everything is very laid out. Both Mafio and John, this was true for their productions. It was like most of the sounds I didn't even really touch. And you can kind of see here on the inserts, there's not a lot happening except for like on certain key tracks where I was making very distinct decisions that I felt were really important to the record. So there's some processing on the bass for example, and then there's some processing on the main pluck. And those two elements are really the only things that are getting like any significant processing at all. Everything else is almost exactly the way that it was tracked in, with like little minor details. But I want to point out why I did certain things on those two main elements. So here's our bass, the way it came in. So in my mind, this, what kind of gives it sort of like a little bit of a Cuban feel here, is that the rhythm is actually being held down by this kind of acoustic bass sound. I mean, it's sort of like an acoustic bass VST, but it has its cool sound of its own. The issue is that it's very, very dark. And so with it being so dark, it doesn't quite sound right in the mix. It doesn't quite drive the rhythm. Como no, si tú a mí me tienes temblando. Como no. It ends up sounding kind of empty, so I would have to turn it up pretty loud in order to get it to kind of push the way it needed to push. And even then, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb because it's so dark compared to the rest of everything else, which is so bright. I would probably have to reframe the rest of the instrumentation to kind of make sense with that darker bass if I wanted to have that sort of smokier tone to the record, which I think would have been fine, but it didn't feel like that's where the record was really pushing. So my processing here was to really give the bass the brightness that it needed in order to kind of show up, and also to enhance like the punch of it so that it almost acted more like a kick drum. So here is with my processing on. So now it's got that little bit of distortion in the high end, which kind of pulls the ear to it and gives it a little texture. It's got a sort of like plasticky attack, but it's a very punchy, solid attack now, and it has a lot of overtones, so it sounds a lot brighter. What I'm doing here is I'm using Saturn. You can see I've pushed up 14 dB of top end, right? So I just basically pushed the top until I got what I wanted, plus added some distortion to it. Some EQ, which is then, pushing up a little bit of that 800 hertz range, which on an acoustic bass is usually where the nose of it is. Little tiny tweaks over here, adding more top end, and then adding a little bit of body as well here with Vitamin. So definitely pushing up a lot of tone, and you can hear it's a pretty radical transformation. But it needs that because that's what's pushing the rhythm. And I think in retrospect, I maybe even should have mixed the bass a little bit louder, maybe just pushing it up like 1 or 2 dB. Anyway, the other thing that I'm affecting here is this main pluck right here. So that's the melodic driver of the record. Without any of my effects, it sounds like this. And in the mix, without any of those effects that I added, it would sound like this. Which is by no means bad, but it doesn't have the same sort of texture and fullness that this has. Basically, all this processing is designed to just add body to the sound and also to give it some more tail, because there's so much space in between all of these very transient elements that I felt like it could use some melodic bedding to support the vocal. Now, with rigatone, this is a little bit of a departure from the norm. Usually, you want to have a pretty good amount of space in between all of the pluck hits and everything like that, but there are styles of reggaeton where it is fuller and does have more of that kind of wash to it to provide a melodic bedding. So it really just depends on what the producer's style is and everything like that. But this one, basically, where is it? Okay, so adding reverb as an insert. Little radiator, which is basically just giving it a little bit more kind of warmth around 200 to 400 hertz. High pass, getting out some noise. And transient, adding some punch to it. So there are some other things to point out. I think one of the things that I want to point out here is this kind of thread throughout. This is sort of the personality track right here. So those kinds of things I feel like are the things that give the record sort of its unique identity. If I were to take this out, actually I'm going to take out the Hey Mama as well. So when I take those out, this record suddenly feels like it could be any record. Like it doesn't have its identity anymore. So one of the things that I do is in between the lyric lines where there's that little bit of space, I'm riding up the bop because I want that to kind of keep pushing the momentum. One of the things that I kind of regret that I wish I had done a little bit more was actually push it further. In my mind, at the time, I was still sort of in this mindset of believing that if you can hear the automation, that's not a good thing. That automation should feel very smooth and gradual, and that's just more engineer BS, where like you'd read that in forums. The actual average listener does not care about that kind of stuff, and they don't notice it. So really what's important is that the musical thread that you need comes up, and even if the automation is obvious to you, the end listener is not going to understand that as automation. They're just going to hear the element come in where it needs to come in. So I do wish that I had pushed the little beep beep sounds in between the lyric lines a little bit further, but I'll play it down, and basically, you can kind of follow where the automation is. Si tú a mí me tienes temblando, como no, si yo a ti te tengo sudando, seguimos bajando, como no, si la noche está comenzando, como no, si la cama está. So I just, for demonstration purposes, just pulled up that automation right there, and that's very chunky automation where it's like there then not there, and even that I feel like probably would have been better at the end of the day. But of course, the best way to do it would have been to do something like this, maybe not quite so much, and then have it come in a little bit more gradually like this, so that it's a smoother ride up, like that. Anyway, I'm making a point of pointing this out because, not only can you learn from the things that I'm doing well, but I think that there's a lot to be learned from the things that I could have done better. And I feel like every time I do one of these walkthroughs, there's certain little bits of that. But I mean, that's certainly one thing. I think that hitting the end listener over the head with things a little bit is good, because they're not going to notice the same subtleties that somebody who's really tuned in and listening, like a producer or an engineer, is necessarily going to hear. So you want to be a little bolder with your flavors, a little bolder with your automation moves. So that's one of the things that I do wish I had done better. Okay, so let's jump over to Becky's vocal. Becky's vocal was tracked over at Sphere. Her chain was a C800G going into an LA2A, and then some board EQ on an SSL G Plus board. And her vocal, I'll play the way the vocal came in here. This is just with auto-tune. So I committed the auto-tune, and that's what this track is here, along with some basic little volume rides here. And then I have a little bit of EQ and a little bit of compression, and that's it, really, in terms of like actual processing on her vocal. And the reason is because it didn't really need any more. So first of all, I already had a really good chain for her voice in particular. I was able to get a really good sound with the board EQ doing most of the work that I needed to get. I was able to set the LA2A to get exactly the right amount of compression that I wanted. And I also had, at the time, he was my assistant, Josh Woods. He's now a really great engineer in his own right, and I'm sure his assistant is probably picking up some great records, but he was there as well. And so not only was I on there, but also another great set of ears was there. So we were able to dial in a really, really great sound. Plus, on top of all of that, Becky is unbelievably talented. She's super, super performer. So with all those things going on, I show a lot of tricks with things that I do with vocals and this and that and the other, but sometimes you don't need all that. Sometimes it just comes in, and then, after you kind of mix with it a little dash of EQ, taking out a little bit of weirdness around 2K, and then some tiny little weirdnesses in the low mids, nothing crazy there, and then just a little hair of compression, and not even like a fancy compressor or anything. It's literally just our comp doing like the most basic compression in the world too. So it's like, it's almost the 4-to-1 kind of thing, and that's it. That's the sound right there. So I'll take out the verb and delay for a second. So really wonderfully easy, and actually the ambience around her voice was really easy too. So when we tracked, typically when I track with H delay, and oh, this isn't my preset, but normally I'll even have it on something that I call Weiss quarter, which is basically just quarter note with some filtering going on. But we tracked with a little bit of delay, and this is literally like the default of reverb. And a lot of times when I'm tracking, I just throw on like the quickest delay and reverb in the world because I just want to get to the tracking and this will suffice. But it actually sounded really, really good on her. And when I made like the quick little studio rough, I really liked it. So I kept those two effects on there. The changes that I did was first I routed the H delay into my reverbs so that it's not like a dry delay. I oftentimes prefer to do that. And then I also supplemented it with a second reverb here. So what we're hearing is a blend of this Eventide SP212 or whatever it's called, and reverb, and the two just come together and sound really nice. Also worth mentioning, they're both pretty subtle. Like I don't have them very loud. She doesn't really need a lot of reverb on her voice to be colorful. She has really a great natural color, and I don't think that she necessarily prefers a ton of reverb anyway. I liked it kind of on the drier side, especially because her rhythm was really, really strong. So I'll turn up the reverb real quick just so we can kind of hear what it's doing. But, it's really just sort of a flavor in there. It's also a very short reverb. This one's really only lasting so long. What's the decay time? Yeah, 1.2 seconds. So it's a very short reverb, and then it's coupling with reverb, which is a little bit longer. It's funny, actually, neither of them sound particularly great on their own, but just as like a little combination, it works pretty well. So that was pretty much the whole formula there. Really goes to show that you can get very, very far if you just have a really, really great tracking session or great tracking setup and you know what to do with it. So there's some really fun little spicy kind of ad-lib thingies that happen throughout the verse that I want to focus on for a second. So this is just effect rack and deverb, like the stock Pro Tools deverb. So most of the sort of guitar crunch sound that we're hearing is coming from Devil Lock, and then I'm band passing it to get that sort of like telephony effect. Telephone ad-libs were really popular at that point. The super reverberant ad-libs were just kind of becoming a little bit of a flavor. Like it was very much like still following that kind of Migos style of ad-lib, the Quavo ad-libs. So, and then a little bit of delay here as well, but basically just doing kind of the hip-hop ad-lib thing, but my own version of it. Yeah. And I think that style still works, actually, to be honest with you. Then we've also got these very, very interesting stacks that are happening over here in this sort of like bridge pre-chorusy section. So let's solo those up real quick. Some weird pitch shifting, some little alter boy committed onto those. This is called alter boy here because the format is shifted up, which is what gives it that kind of weird creepy noise and pitch shifting here, giving it that sort of deeper tone. But I think the fun of it really is the Brower motion here, which is this auto panner that not only pans things left and right, but also pans things front and back, so getting louder and quieter and doing what's called circle panning. But it makes this like weird sense of these like strange creepy witch noises, ghost noises that are kind of flying around the stereo field. It just makes that whole moment feel a little bit weird and quirky, which I really dig.
Mareo, si yo me aguanto el deseo, ay me mareo, cada vez que yo te toco, como no, si tú
I think it also works too because musically she's actually singing in the harmonic version of the minor. That sort of half step movement. It's not the natural minor key, and it has this like extreme tension and almost like a built-in dissonance to it, which is why it kind of works as something leading into the chorus as well. So just everything kind of comes together to make it a really fun little moment. Let's see, we got one other little ad-lib effect here. I think this is just delay and reverb. Yeah, this is basically just a printed throw right here.
quieres hablar, yo lo que quiero es darle y no parar.
Yeah, just giving that whole thing a little bit of spice right there. And then the last thing that I want to point out here, which I think is really fun, is the Hey Mamas, where Mafio stopped in the middle of the session and was like, hey, maybe as a post-chorus thing, we can just get everybody in the studio around the microphone singing, Hey Mama. So it's just everybody, Mao, Ricky, Camilo, Akon, and I don't know if Mafia was in there or not. He might have been, but basically we just played the record out of the headphones and everybody just sang it. There's no auto-tune on any of this, by the way. This is just like how it was sung. We did 4 passes. You hear there's like a crazy amount of headphone bleed because we didn't have enough headphones for everybody. But it kind of works in the record, actually. It almost sounds like a percussion layer. EQ-wise, so this is just a tilt shelf. This is just taking out some lows, adding some highs, basically. Just sort of balancing it a little bit. Taking out some mids. Getting that room, a lot of room tone on those. De-esser, another de-esser, and that's it. Really, it was very simple, basically, and everybody sang it like perfectly in key, which is amazing because it's just this one little set of headphones playing things out there. But, sometimes you don't have to have like a perfect or ideal setup in order to get things to work the way that you want it to work. Let me jump down to the mix bus. I think that there's a little bit of action going on there. Yeah, so a little bit of presence. This was really done. So the way that I do my mix bus stuff is I tend to get everything mixed at like 80% the way that I want it. And then maybe even 90%. And then I'll kind of like turn the volume of my playback really, really low. And then I'll hear it and just kind of say, like, does anything need to stick out? Does anything feel like it needs to be more alive? So I felt like both the percussion needed a little bit of bite, which is kind of why I did this. Pulled the vocals up with it, pulled some of the other instruments up with it, and I thought that was fine and it worked. And then I also felt like the vocals, particularly Becky, needed a little bit more body overall, but kind of all the vocals needed a little bit more body. So I pulled it up from 700 hertz, and that kind of pulled the percussion forward in a nice way as well. So, I could have gone to the vocal and done it, but then the vocal would have sort of stepped in front of the mix a little bit in a way that I didn't want. I kind of wanted the vocals inside the mix for this record. So it actually ended up working better on the bus. And then I think I had just gotten this plugin. I think it had just come out, and I'm adding a little bit of saturation to the top end, just to give it a little bit of texture up there. I can't remember how distinct this is. I feel like this is going to be very subtle. It's actually not that subtle. Like, if listen to the top end of like the kick. Hold on, let me hear it again. Yeah, it's actually not that subtle. All the drums really spark to life pretty distinctly. I'll exaggerate it for a second. Let's see, was that 0.41? So let's remember that real quick. Yeah, so that sums up the mix. That was it. So pretty simple, pretty dry. Really, mainly the main thing going on here is just trying to pay attention to the music as much as possible and make the things that need to be really affected in exactly the way that they need to be, and everything else that's working, just leaving it well enough alone because it's working. So, all right, guys, I think this is a good place to wrap up. Right now, I still have the Halloween sound effects design tutorial on sale for 17 bucks. The link to that is in the description. That sale is going to end on November 12th. And then I also have the complete low-end guide tutorial for free if you sign up with the newsletter. That is going to end at the end of the year. And then I'm going to put that on sale, and I'm sort of jumping around with the price, but I think I'm going to put it on sale for like 37 bucks. So I say get it now while it's free, because it won't be long. It's a very good tutorial, and I really probably should be selling it. So, okay, I'm going to wrap up here. If you like this video, hit that like button. If you want to catch more videos like this, hit subscribe with the bell notification so you get notified. And you know what we say here at WeissAdvice. You know what we say. We are musicians, sound is our instrument, and I will catch you next time.